you're back. Hi. So, welcome back to Big Dog Forge. Tim here. So, I need to build tongs, and I don't like hammering out tongs one after the other for my own purposes. It's just, I don't know, one of those things. I'd rather be building something cool. So, I found a way to kind of try to incorporate those two. One of the guys on the channel sent me a comment about a guy in Oregon, John from Gearhart Ironworks, I think his name is, and he built a jig for his power hammer to make tongs with, and I checked that out, and it was a pretty cool thing, and I thought I would try to adapt that to my little junk pile power hammer I got going here. Anyway, he's using a Samax 60, and from what I found online, that thing has a like 116 pound pneumatic ram on it, and I've got a 30 pound cobbled together railroad track thing. Anyway, his footprint on this lower die is 6 inches by 3 inches, and my little railroad track on the bottom of mine is 5 by 2.5. So I'm going to try to figure out how to make that footprint work on mine and see how that does. It's probably going to put a lot of stress on the little hammer, but we're going to do what we can. We'll see how that goes. And I think it'll be fun. And I found a way to make tongs and have a little fun doing it, because you know I like to scrap things together and do what I can. So you're going to see me work on this thing, but I'm going to use nothing but remnants, scraps, drops from other projects. So you'll see me stacking bits and pieces together and welding them up. If you're wondering why I'm doing that and not just getting dimensional steel, it's because that's what I do. I just build stuff out of a junk pile. It's kind of my thing. Anyway, so I hope you enjoy it and stick with me on this one. It should be fun. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Alright, so this piece of angle iron is just a surface to configure and weld on at the moment. So these are going to be the pieces that are going to be our pivot point for our fuller that'll create the offset in the tongs, and they're going to pivot on this bolt, and I'll weld that arm to the bolt. It's a 1/2 inch thick piece of mild steel, so I've got that spacer in there, and the kiss block is what the bolt is going through at the moment, and it's a piece of 3/4 inch. So we'll have to build that up on the base. We get that on there. So we get this welded on. We don't want that weld to leave any marks in the hot metal that we're forging. It will be laying right on top of it. So this is going to be our base that will clamp to our lower die. I've got a piece of 1/2 inch and a piece of 1/8 inch to build that piece of steel up to 5/8 inch. And that's where I'm starting from the base. That'll step up, and that'll be the offset that will create the jaw in the beginning. So the piece that I'm welding on there is a piece of 1/4 inch, and then we're going to put a piece of 1/8 inch on top of it, so we have our 3/8 that we need. And then there's a 1/4 inch gap between the fuller that comes down and the bottom, so that'll give us a 5/8 inch as well from the base up to the bottom of that fuller. And the piece I'm welding on in the corner is for the offset for the jaw from the boss. And we'll weld that up, and we're going to have to clean it up a little bit. We'll have to file out that weld to give ourselves a nice radius, so that offset in the jaw has a nice transition. And clean all the surfaces up. We're going to give her a shot here. Now this is just a sort of a preliminary test to see how this is going to go. Tack a little handle on that arm so I can flip it out of the way if need be. And honestly, that little arm didn't last long. It popped off right there. That's a piece of 5/8 rebar And of course the clamp dropped off and the thing moved around and blah blah blah. But it seemed to hammer it out pretty well. Of course it didn't go quite as fast as the one in the original video I saw, but we got a little work to do here. So after I welded the handle back on, I noticed that the hammering and the pressure had ovaled that hole out, and I had a little tack on that nut that broke loose, and there just wasn't enough metal at the top of that hole going through that 3/4 piece. So we're going to reinforce the kiss block with a piece of 3/4 inch square represented by the green that you see there, and then a 1/2 inch block on top to support that hole. We're going to put a diagonal that our shafts will go through so that our fuller will have an axle to spin on. And with any luck at all, this will be enough to support that, I guess I'm going to call it a fuller, for lack of a better term. Let's see what happens. We'll grind that down and get that on. So I didn't show all the fabrication here, but there's the finished thing. And it's got a handle on the end of that axle. And it worked out pretty well. It held up. You're going to notice that handle on the end of that shaft disappear and reappear throughout the video. It kept breaking off. And it took a little getting used to, knowing which way to turn this thing and what you could do with it, what you couldn't do with it. But it seemed to be working all right. It took more heats than the guy from Gerhard Iron, obviously, working with a much smaller hammer. There you go. And we'll get that back in the offset for the jaws so we can straighten that out a little bit. Now this is a piece of 9/16 steel. You can go down about 1/2 inch with this thing. Just drawing the reins out real quick. I'm going to put this set of tongs together, our initial set, just to see how this thing works out, how the offsets match up, that kind of thing. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on detail here. Just get this stuff together so we can continue modifying and upgrading this machine. They worked out pretty well. They're a little bit fine, a little too light for my taste. They're great for light work, nice light tongs. The problem is this offset right here limits the opening of the jaws. So if you need a larger jaw, they're just problematic. So what we're going to do is we're going to upgrade the green areas. We're going to put a piece of 1/4 inch thick cold rolled steel in there and weld it into place, and that'll increase the height of our jaw offset and the offset for the boss. So it'll give us a wider base to start with, and we should be able to create some larger tongs for larger material. So let's get some measurements on these blocks. Our kiss block is 1 1/4 inches, and our little jaw block is 1/2 inch, and the gap between the boss anvil, we'll call it, and the fuller is 3/4 of an inch, and the height of the boss anvil is 7/8 of an inch. You're going to notice just at the bottom of your screen there's a rail that I've welded on to keep the angle iron from pushing back towards the middle of the railroad track, and I welded on a little rail around the front to keep the clamps from migrating off the face of the thing. And this time we're going to start with some 5/8 inch square stock. It's a lot more material here, and you probably saw that transition. That was 2 heats to get it down to that 3/8 mark, and then there were a couple more heats to get this thinned down on the reins, from the boss to the reins. And then there was a couple of heats to narrow those reins up, that transition up to the reins. Now this takes it down to 3/8 of an inch in both directions, from the boss to the reins. So there's quite a bit of material to move on this particular piece. 5/8 inch square is pretty hefty stuff. And then I used a bottom fuller to start drawing this out, and then I just went to the regular anvil after it got thin enough. And there was so much material there, those things came out a couple of feet long. And I built this little fullering tool to create some bee jaws on this one. You can see the offset on the boss there is much more substantial. And we'll get this thing riveted up and see what this offset looks like. Now I made these to hold 5/8 inch square. I've got a piece of old tool steel there that's just a few hundredths of an inch smaller than 5/8, so it was close enough. And we get everything straightened up, and there they are. And this is actually a piece of 1/2 inch square bar, and it worked out really well. The reins are really flexible, they're very light still. The offset's a lot better. You can get a lot larger jaws out of them. And this thing is 3/8 of an inch, because that's what the kiss block is set at, but so is the reins. And I like my reins a little heavier than that. And that should be right about 3/8 of an inch. So we're going to have to do something about that. We need that area right there a little bit wider, right there, running down that rein, the transition from the boss. So remember where we put our 1/4 inch. What we're going to do is we're going to add an 1/8 inch plate with a hinge on it, and then we're going to put a handle going up around the corner on a pivot so we can flip that up and down. What that'll do is when you put your tong in there with that 1/8 inch plate down, it'll increase the height of the kiss block by 1/8, going from 3/8 to 1/2 inch when the adapter plate is in this position. Okay, so there it is in real life. And you'll notice the handle's busted off that thing again. Just keeps popping off. Alright, so we're going to start with some 5/8 inch hot rolled steel for this next set of tongs. And we're going to go ahead and use the offset adapter to make that rein transition just a little wider, about 1/8 of an inch. Now I'm working on both halves of the tong at the same time here. So it takes a couple of heats to knock that all the way down to 3/8 of an inch from that 5/8 bar. Okay, so we'll get this thing over onto its side, put the offset in for the jaws on both halves of this tong. And I noticed that John from Gerhardt Ironworks, when he was doing this, he had his tongs flipped with the offset going the other direction. I tried that and it just seemed backwards to me. I'm not really sure if there's a right way or a wrong way to do this, so this is what I'm doing. It actually worked out quite well. That fuller, when it flips up like that, works as a jack to hold the hammer up, since this hammer doesn't have a brake on it. Worked out really well. There we go. We got our little adapter plate down, and that'll hold that gap to a 1/2 inch. We flip it back out, go on its side for the 3/8, flip it back in for our 1/2 inch wide on the reins. And it seemed to be working quite well. It's holding up, not moving too much on the hammer. It is something that you have to practice, the timing and making sure that you don't hit the wrong piece with the wrong part and put dents in it. There you go. Nice offset. It's got a good 1/2 inch wide transition coming down from the boss. And here's the 2 halves. To keep this just a little shorter, we're going to go straight to the anvil for assembly and skip the drawing the reins out. I ended up, because the bosses were larger on these, I ended up drifting these out to 3/8 of an inch because I wanted to use larger rivets in this larger set of tongs. And we've already drifted them there. Give them riveted up. And we're going to set these up to hold a piece of 3/4 inch square stock. Just going to make some flat nib tongs out of these. And you're going to notice that one jaw is just slightly longer than the other one. I had it a little too far in the machine. But that was easily taken care of. I just took a grinder to it and evened them out in the end. There you go. They hold good and tight, nice and strong. Got some good reins on them. So here's a comparison. Much wider reins, nice grip, good pair of tongs. And it took very little time to build those. So that second pair at the bottom, you know, a few hammer marks in it, and then this was the first pair that we built. And you can see the 3/8 inch reins. The one at the bottom has a 1/2 inch wide, and the one at the top is 3/8. It's much more substantial. Does a lot better job. So that's the tongs. Let's take another look at this machine. So there's our adapter plate and our fuller for the offset on the tongs. That adapter plate just flips over and it gives you a 1/2 inch instead of the 3/8. There we go. And then I put this rail around to keep the clamps from migrating through vibration and sliding off the sides. And of course the handle, this weld right here keeps breaking, and it's a piece of mild steel welded on there. I'm not sure what's up with that, but before I'm done I'm sure it'll be a solid piece of weld up to the top. Alright guys, we got just a couple of last things to look at. I wanted to take a look at the bearings on these linear carriages and see how they held up through all this. They're rolling real well. There doesn't seem to be any movement at all in the hammer. No back and forth. Seems real tight. They held up a lot better than I thought they would. Alright. So let's take a look at what we did after we got done with the videos. What you're seeing here represents just about 5 hours worth of work. And there's a couple of pair that didn't make it. They just weren't quite right. So anyway, there you have the tongs.
Hey guys, well, if you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me through this thing. It was a lot of fun. I was really surprised how well the little hammer held up. It's just a trooper. It's amazing. It did really, really well. I have some awesome new tongs and more to come, I'm sure. I want to see if it can make some kind of box tongs with it. That'll be fun. I'm sure it'll be another video. Anyway, it's amazing what you can do after Thanksgiving dinner, huh? It's about 1:30 in the morning, and I think I'm done for the day. I do appreciate you watching. If you liked it, click like. If you know anybody else that might like it, share. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I appreciate it, guys. Thanks. Have a great night, and be safe. Thanks. Take care, guys.